ladies and gentlemen. Long time no talk. Sorry for my absence, but I just moved into a new apartment, and the place is awesome. But with that being said, my little studio is right next to my radiator. So if you hear some poofs and water dripping, that's just the sound of the radiator in the background. You shouldn't be able to hear it, but it's all good anyways. I'm going to be reading two stories by Christopher Maxim. I reached out to him and asked if I could do these stories, and he said no problem, go for it. But I thought I would advertise him a little bit and just mention that he has a new book out called How to Exit Your Body and Other Strange Tales. You can get it on Amazon for the Kindle, and as well as paperback for $5.99. You can also get it on his website as well. With that being said, the two stories I will be reading the two stories that I'll be reading. First one is called Some Shooting Stars Aren't Meant to Be Wished Upon. And the second one is called My Dad is the Reason the Cubs Won the World Series. I'm giving you a little discretion that for the second story there is a little bit of animal violence in it. If you're squeamish to animals getting hurt, which, I don't blame you. That's a pretty rough subject. With that being said, let's get going. I hope you enjoy. There it was, a fragment of the universe, hurtling through the cosmos, and there I was, gazing up from the comfort of a farmhouse rooftop, built by my father's hands, smack dab in the middle of nowhere. In all the years we lived out there on the countryside, not a damn thing remarkable ever happened. This meteor shower was the highlight of my entire life, and that's why, with a bit of wonder glazed over my eyes, I wished on that one shooting star, brighter than the rest. I wished for some excitement. Almost as if in answer to my plea, the meteor took a U-turn and fell from the sky like a falcon diving for its prey. I watched, astonished, as it passed overhead and crashed into the wooded area behind my dad's property. Surprisingly, there was no sound, no explosion, just the rustling of tree leaves as it plummeted through the forest's canopy. To make matters more peculiar, I swear I saw a red glow emanating from the crash site, however faint. After the initial shock wore off, I climbed down from the roof and raced into the woods as fast as my scrawny legs would allow. I had a rough idea of where the thing landed, so I darted in that direction, hoping I could take home a chunk of space rock as a souvenir to show my father. If I was lucky, it would be a treasure thrilling enough to keep him from getting mad that I went off into the woods by my lonesome. I could only hope. Eventually, I came to a small clearing where the moonlight gently caressed the earth, granting me a somewhat clearer picture of the flora and fauna around me. I noticed many small animals, frantically scurrying north for no discernible reason. I surmised that the meteor's landing frightened the wildlife nearby, and so I decided to head off in the opposite direction. Sure enough, after maybe 10 more minutes of my impromptu hike through the wilderness, I came upon the source of the mysterious glow I'd seen before. It was no meteor. There, sitting in a small depression in the ground, was a metallic pod of sorts, complete with a blinking beacon protruding from its surface like an antenna. The craft itself was spherical, and at least twice my height. I'd never seen anything like it before. I was utterly dumbfounded. Before I could take a closer look, a hatch opened from its side, startling me back into the woods. With a racing heart, I scuttled behind the nearest tree. I cautiously positioned my head around the trunk and spied on the object with bated breath. I didn't know what to expect. Was it some kind of top-secret military weapon? Or perhaps a remote-control gadget built by a genius hermit living nearby? Would a little green man step out to greet me, demanding to speak with my leader? No matter the outcome, my eyes were glued to that metallic pod, for better or for worse. A dark violet ooze spilled from the object, forming a large puddle at its base. The slimy substance then scaled the pod, coating the exterior from top to bottom. As the slime moved around the sphere, the light above started blinking. All at once, the purple liquid was repelled from the craft and back onto the ground below. There, it began taking on a more humanoid shape. As the ooze changed, so did its color. It became white and fuzzy, not unlike television static. Appropriately enough, TV and radio dialogue soon filled the forest. This thing was collecting signals from the air, regurgitating lines from popular programs long since broadcast. At least, that's what it appeared to be doing. My mouth agape in awe, I began leaning forward without realizing it. The signal ceased abruptly, and I fell, head first, onto a pile of dead branches, creating a loud crunch. From my new vantage point, I watched the white figure turn in my direction. I then heard it speak. "Who's there?" Its voice was shaky and unnatural, a low, monotone growl coupled with a harsh reverb. Scared for my life, I picked myself up and ran back home faster than I had ever run before. I reclaimed my perch on the roof and carefully surveyed the property. Once I was sure I hadn't been followed, I hopped through my bedroom window and climbed into bed, hoping that I dreamt the whole thing up. An adventure concocted by my imagination, running wild. I wished it were that simple, but wishful thinking rarely plays out in one's favor. The following day, I came downstairs to the familiar aroma of eggs and bacon. My father always cooked a hearty breakfast on Sundays. The sight I was greeted with upon entering the dining room, however, was anything but familiar. There, sitting at the table across from my father, was a man in a clean-cut suit, wearing a bowler hat and a striped tie. We rarely entertained visitors, so I was more than a little perplexed. "Son, this is Mr. Grovewood. His car broke down a couple miles up the road, so he's going to be staying with us for a few nights, just until he can get things sorted out." "How do you do, Spot?" I remained silent, perturbed by the man's presence and still shaken from the previous night. "He's paying us a generous sum to stay here, so you best treat him with respect." My dad glared at me in a way that effectively relayed his meaning. As such, I complied. "I'm well, sir. Thank you for asking." The man smiled, albeit awkwardly, and I ran off outside to tend to the farm. I didn't know why, but I'd suddenly lost my appetite. Something just wasn't adding up. How did this stranger find the farm after his car broke down? We were literally surrounded by forest. Dumb luck, perhaps. Doubtful. I was beginning to feel that his appearance the day after that thing landed in the woods wasn't a mere coincidence, but this wasn't a theory I had enough nerve to explore. After all, I had already convinced myself that the previous nights were nothing more than a bad dream. The man would be gone in a few days either way, so I tried not to dwell on it. The next couple of nights were bizarre. Mr. Grovewood attempted to watch a sitcom with us while eating dinner, but his reactions were less than normal. He seemed confused by the program and would only laugh after he noticed us laughing. And this wasn't just any laughter, mind you. It was a loud guffaw of intensely uncomfortable proportions. I was almost relieved when he got pulled away by a phone call from a business colleague, though I didn't hear a single word and engaged. The following night, I walked downstairs to the kitchen for a glass of milk, only to find Mr. Grovewood chowing down on a raw steak from the freezer. I asked him about it, and all he said was, "It's just a midnight snack. Trust me, a little color does the body good." Needless to say, I ran back to my room in a hurry, without my milk. Last night, however, is when I became truly afraid. Walking past the guest room to get to the bathroom, I overheard Mr. Grovewood on the phone. This time, he most certainly spoke. "Did you receive the information I transmitted?" "Yes, this is the language we must use from here on out. We must avoid suspicion and blend in with the rest. It's a lovely place, rich in minerals, water, and life forms. You and the others are going to like it here. So long as you're ready, there's no going back from here. This will be our new home.
No need. Why waste the material on transports when I can beam you down instantaneously? I have 2 vessels here, ripe for the taking.
The Cubs haven't won a World Series in 108 years. That's a long freaking time. To even consider that they upped their game this year to win is blasphemous. Even more so if you think it was luck. It sure as hell wasn't. But, then again, that's easy for me to say. I know the whole story. You don't. But hey, maybe you're not a sports fan and you don't really care about baseball. That's fine. I'm not asking you to. I'm just here to tell you about all the fucked up shit my dad did to ensure that this game would go off without a hitch. Before I get to that, let me give you a little background. Sports is everything to my family. We live, breathe, eat, and sleep it. My mom, dad, uncles, aunts, and cousins, all of them. It's how we talk, how we bond, and how we put up with each other. To be honest, with all of the shit talking that goes on in my family, sports is probably the only thing keeping us together. Of all the sports that we watch, baseball is our favorite. Always has been. It's in our blood. We watch every game we can of the teams that we follow. The number one being the Chicago Cubs. That's right. We are die-hard Cubs fans, and it's all because of our heritage. You see, my family and I live on the East Coast. All you ever hear is Red Sox this and Red Sox that. We don't follow that trend. If you trace my lineage back to the dead ball era, you'll find Frank Chance, a Cubs infielder. He also played for the New York Yankees, but we don't talk about that. We're proud of the mark he made in our team's history and our families. But enough about ancestry. Let's get to why we're here. It was September 2008. The Cubs were leading the National League Central Division and were in the middle of a game against the Cardinals. If they won, they'd make it to the playoffs. Tensions were running high in my house that day. Relatives were over, watching the game, and we were all getting loud and rowdy. We needed this win. Bottom of the ninth, my dad pulls out an old foam finger and puts it on. It was apparently the one his father had bought for him at his first Cubs game. Long story short, the Cubs end up winning 5-4. It was a huge win for us, and we all got up and cheered in celebration. We were ecstatic. Next game, Cubs lose 3-0 to the Dodgers. Talk about a freaking buzzkill. Anyway, at the end of the game, my now depressed dad pulled out his foam finger again. He stares at it for a few moments before putting it away. Looking back, I realized that this is where it all started. My dad hadn't worn the foam finger during the Dodgers game, so he convinced himself that that's why the Cubs lost. After all, they won when we had it on. Makes sense, right? Well, to my dad it did. And so began my dad's superstitious behavior. He wore the foam finger for many games after that. He wouldn't take it off, even for a second. We all found it kind of weird, but we didn't say anything. The family let him live in his own little world. After a while, the foam finger stopped working. My dad told me it was out of juice and he needed a new system. The things he brought to the games after that were normal, considering that he wanted a little extra luck. A 4-leaf clover, a horseshoe, and even a rabbit's foot. Anything he could think of to help the Cubs along. But he didn't stop there. After a while, my dad went a little crazy. His systems became obsessive and compulsive. He would sometimes stand on one foot during certain innings, send me or my mother out of the room at odd times, or even shut the TV off for minutes at a time. It bothered the hell out of us, but if we said anything, he'd just get mad and say it needed to be done. It was the only way the Cubs could win. That's how we lived for years. The rest of the family stopped coming over to watch the game because of it, and we knew they talked behind our backs. We didn't care all that much. My dad was weird, but we still loved him. This was just a quirk, nothing more, or so I thought. Fast forward to 2016, the Cubs make it to the playoffs again. My dad felt redeemed. His systems were working, and this was his first chance in 8 years to go all the way, so to speak. He wanted to bring this one home. He told me that we were going to win the series like it was a sure thing. He was right. During each and every playoff game, my dad was not present. We had to watch it without him. He would show up when it was over and ask for the score. Every game the Cubs lost, he'd say, "I need to up the ante," and provide no context as to what he meant. For the ones they won, he'd look smug as all hell, and wouldn't even watch it after, even though we recorded it for him. He was acting really strange, but my mom and I had dealt with this weirdness before. We just went with it. By game 5, I was getting a little worried and super curious. My dad wouldn't miss the first Cub series in over 100 years. How could he just turn away from that? I decided to follow him out of the house and see what he was up to. I watched from the window as my dad slipped out the back door during game 5. I was beginning to think his method was just to not watch the game, but then I noticed him sneak into the shed out back. When the coast was clear, I snuck out there too. I darted to the back side of the shed and peeked into the tiny window that was there. What I saw was nothing short of unsettling. The shed had been cleared out. No tools, no lawnmower, nothing. On the shed floor was some sort of pentagram painted in red. Off in the corner was my neighbor's dog, bound and gagged. That dog got loose at least once a week and would always come straight to our yard. My dad loathed it with a passion, and now he had it captured. For what reason, I did not know. Feeling a bit uneasy, I watched as my dad paced around the shed reading an old book. He looked so focused to the point that it was scary. He wasn't himself, that's for sure. At least not the happy-go-lucky guy that raised me. Eventually, my dad grabbed the dog and placed it into the center of the pentagram. It flailed about, but he had it tied up good. He then grabbed what looked like a hunting knife from his back pocket. My heart sunk. I wasn't sure what he was going to do, but I knew it couldn't be good. It most certainly wasn't. My dad stabbed the golden retriever several times while muttering something under his breath. I watched in disgust as the dog struggled to break free while my father mercilessly slaughtered it. I almost upchucked right then and there. I know he hated the damn mutt, but how could he do that? I cautiously made my way back to the house and went up to the room. My mom reminded me that the game was on, but I didn't care. I told her I'd come down with something. I wasn't exactly lying. I felt pretty damn sick after seeing what my dad did to that poor animal. I laid there in bed for a while, thinking about what I had seen. I couldn't get it out of my head. I needed to know why. As such, I waited for my dad to come back in. That's when I snuck back out to the shed with a flashlight, hoping to find some answers. I made it past my parents, no problem. They were inside talking about the game for a while. I pranced over to the shed and tried the knob, but it was locked. Lucky for me, the shed door wasn't all that sturdy. After a few tries of slamming it with my shoulder, it opened up. I quickly illuminated the shed's interior with my flashlight. On the floor was the pentagram along with the droplets of animal blood. The dog was gone. I assumed that my dad buried the body out back. I looked around a bit more until I found something tucked away in the corner. It was the book. I scrambled over to it and picked it up with haste. I had to know what was in it. I read the title, Contents, and skimmed through a few pages. From what I gather, it was some sort of catalog of demonic rituals. The rituals in question were meant to bring forth luck in great quantities. My dad had folded some of the pages to save his spot. He did that with everything he reads: books, magazines, the newspapers, etc. I went to the pages and read along. It seemed that my dad had been chanting specific incantations while sacrificing animals. It started small, but eventually led up to the dog. That was the biggest animal yet. The book described using larger animals in succession as the key to attracting a temporarily perpetual state of prosperity. In other words, so long as my dad made sacrifices, his lucky streak would keep going. At least, that's what he chose to believe. In any case, I was stunned when I read the last page my dad had folded. This ritual involved a human sacrifice. My heart fell back in my chest while I read. Was that my dad's end game? Was that part of his stupid system? No, it couldn't be. My dad would never kill someone. That's ridiculous. He's a good man. Surely baseball wasn't this important to him. He wouldn't go that far. But maybe he did. The World Series is over, and the Cubs won. My dad left the night of Game 7, but I didn't follow him. I couldn't. He took his car. I didn't know what to do. I could have called the cops, but he's my dad. I have to believe he wouldn't do something so heinous, so wrong. I mean, could someone really obsess over something so much that it keeps them from thinking clearly? Could it cloud one's judgment to such a degree that they could do the unspeakable? Could mere superstition morally derail someone so quickly? I can't be sure. For now, I'm trying to pretend that the whole ordeal never happened. My dad seems happy, and I guess I am too. Kind of. The Cubs won for the first time in over a century. It's a time to celebrate, not dwell on uncertainties. That's why, when a local woman was reported missing and popped up on the news the other day, I ignored it. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. It has to be. Or is it? Regardless, I can't look him in the eye anymore. Not after what I witnessed. He isn't the person I grew up with. He isn't my dad. He is a man consumed by what he loves. Not family, but sports. Baseball drove him to kill, and I can't forgive him for that. The entire town is searching for a missing woman, and my neighbor is out every night looking for her dog. Meanwhile, my dad rests easy, knowing that the Cubs won the World Series. They say a man only smiles in his sleep if he's truly content. But my dad isn't a man. He's a monster. And that does it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you fell asleep and had some sweet dreams. I'll see you in the next video. Go Cubs.